when we talk about net zero transport and transit infrastructure, those elements are really important for community design and the sustainability of the place. The best practice is around net zero technologies with transit corridor development. The problem and the gap is how do we get social and affordable housing integrated into transit corridor development? And that's the challenge. Ensuring that social and affordable housing is included in net zero transit corridor development and transport infrastructure development, that's tricky because actually there's nothing in the policy environment that requires us to do so. But there's also nothing in the policy environment that inhibits us from doing so. So the answer of how really is at this point at a case-by-case basis and up to the construct of the project and how we set up everything from the governance to the procurement processes as well as the design and the community engagement in the development of these projects. But to answer your question, the how, the solution right now really resides at that project level and then the interfaces between the local government, the local communities, and the state government in the policy environments. In summary, the policy environment acknowledges these needs. For example, at the state level, both in projects and project formations, but also at the policy level, there's terms like well-located places when we talk about where do we build social and affordable housing projects. They need to be well-located, or they should be well-located. That's the policy, that's the state of the policy environment now. And well-located means within a reasonable distance to established or planned transit nodes. What we're trying to advocate for and what we're researching is to what extent does policy need to acknowledge, encourage, and regulate the inclusion and the involvement and the integration across these sectors. Because within the engineering space and the built environment space, what we have is an environment where transit gets developed in one silo and housing gets developed in another silo. So everything from the governance to the procurement to the contractors that are building on site, they aren't integrated. And we want to understand better how to integrate from the outset. And that's why, in summary, the policy environment is one that acknowledges it, would support it, but it is up to the individual project levels and the individual communities to be able to ensure that that happens. Or there needs to be a broader change to policy, especially at the state level, to require it and to put incentives in place and other enforcement mechanisms, as well as explicit guidance on how to go about doing this integration in the current policy environment in order for that to be more conducive. A new model is necessary, especially where governance and procurement are concerned in policy, to ensure or better equip and better enable the integration across these sectors, those being transport and housing in particular. Because the current state is that transport gets developed according to what the community or what the city needs to develop in its urban fabric as existing, and housing gets developed according to where the best located land is available to be able to do these projects. So one kind of follows the other, and there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing, that approach that happens. Over time, the transit and other infrastructure that is needed to activate the place should occur regardless. But currently, they're not integrated and they're certainly not synchronized. So there's a missed opportunity. In response to the best practices and what could be, especially in terms of governance structures, it has to be transdisciplinary from the start. So the first conversations that are happening about a planned community development or a planned transit corridor development needs to have representation that is active, engaged, and invested in the outcomes of these projects from the outstart. And primarily what that should entail is it should entail private industry, it should entail multiple levels of government, and it should entail community and civil society representation. And that's where an alliance structure, as we've been researching within these sustainable built environment portfolio and recommending about, that's where these are really adept to handle those complex arrangements from the get-go. Conversely, without it, there simply aren't the roles and responsibilities delegated to facilitate the complex communication structure, let alone the complex financing structure or the individual timelines and project management and delivery. It becomes too complicated. So it needs to acknowledge that complexity and be set up to interface with the different sectors in the transdisciplinary space from the outgo, and specifically that begins with the governance structure. So the best practices that Australia has and has demonstrated are within the alliance umbrella would be public-private partnerships are good, but they take a little bit of effort, but there's more advanced ones like city deals, and the city deal projects generally have a good track record of being able to foster that transdisciplinary engagement and bring in stakeholders that can be actively invested and engaged right from the outgo. And that's what's needed most. So I would argue that the money is there, right? So from the what is needed perspective to make sure that this happens, money is being spent in the right ways with the right intentions and across the right pots of people and projects. That is happening, and that's good. What isn't happening that could happen immediately is taking a look at our evaluation process, specifically within procurement strategies. And when evaluating these projects, how are we looking at the requirements that are being put forth and stated by potential delivery partners? That's where it really matters, and that's an aspect of policy, and it's an aspect of governance, and especially the responsibility and the ability at the state level to really influence how these monies are going to be spent and what the potential outcomes are going to be. So within evaluative frameworks, right now, the state there's checklists of compliance requirements. Obviously, everything has to look good from an accounting perspective. Everything has to be transparent and communicated to the people, especially where public monies are being invested. And then things have to be ethical. Are we doing the right thing by sourcing labor that is compliant with the ethics and the ethos of modern slavery laws, for example? But what we're not doing, and what we're not doing by de facto of what's required within the policy environment, is saying, how are we evaluating these project proposals and how the money is being spent in terms of the broader placemaking objectives that we talk about within the sustainable built environment portfolio? Of those, in particular, in this case, is to what degree, for example, does this project, if it's a transport corridor development, and we're going to spend money to bring in renewable energy and renewable technologies to have cutting-edge light rail systems or autonomous trackless mid-tier systems, for example. What within that procurement strategy is being put in the project that's being evaluated to say, yeah, and we're going to be able to service this community with this ratio of mixed housing diversity that includes this proportion of social and affordable housing. Why that's important is because conversely on the other side, on the housing side, for example, absolutely everything is in place to be able to do a project like that if the project team is outfitted and of the mind to do that type of project that's integrated. But there is nothing there to keep a developer from putting forth a project that loosely meets the requirements and descriptions of well located in terms of existing transit infrastructure, but has absolutely zero property diversity, is entirely constructed of social housing, for example, and is isolated from the rest of the community, or so-called ghetto building, historically. There's nothing in place that we could see right now that prohibits that or inhibits that. And that's a problem, and that can be expressly and easily looked at from the evaluation side before anything else. The possibilities that come from placemaking are incredible for transforming the nature of how we construct our built environments. Because placemaking is a holistic look at the complex systems of systems where these projects will be developed. And the objective of placemaking, of making good places, is to automatically, by design, to get civil society and the occupants of these buildings, the users of these buildings, invested in the place. That's what it is. It's not just sustainability in terms of will this place survive for 7 generations? It's not just sustainability in terms of let's do less harm. It's sustainability in terms of generating agency within the community that is going to be using and occupying the space and engendering a sense of identity and belonging to the space to get to a point of stewardship where people are so invested and interested in the space that they want to take care of it. And that's how you get those 7-generation impacts. So placemaking is looking at abstracted principles and saying what would be contributive, especially in the design and the conceptual stages, what can we account for in these projects that's going to contribute to engendering that sense of place and that active engagement from the community that inherits the project. That's why placemaking is so important. And it's not something that's relatively new. The ideas of good placemaking, at least in the Western context, go back to ancient Greece and Rome. And these are things that have been thought about and exercised in different contexts throughout history in the built environment, where humans are interacting with and making improvements to the spaces that they inhabit. So it's just trying to set that context. Where we've diverted from that is by asking questions of how can we build more efficiently, and how can we more efficiently capitalize on the products and services that we are generating in terms of building environments for humans to occupy. And so there's a bit of a paradigm shift and a return to understanding that humans need to feel belonging and be invested in their space. It's a requirement of our species. Acknowledging that the placemaking principles that we've been researching in this portfolio are all about how do we, from the outset, engender that response in these people, in these communities, from the get-go, before there's even groundbreaking or a dollar spent on construction. The research that's being put out, and there's researchers like Kate Myrick who did her PhD around placemaking in general, and also activating place with social infrastructure in addition to transit and how people are using the space and embedding that into the design. This research is imperative, is pivotal for us understanding how humans not only make use of a space and identify with a space, but also how that relationship creates value, realized value that's marketable. So the bet is, can I create a space that meets all the functions that are necessary of the design of the space? And can I create a place that is activated? And the bet is the latter, the activated place that's activated by design, is going to be more valuable than a place that is functionally active or functional. Here's why the latter is more valuable inherently. Because it's about how humans are making use of the space, not just do the humans have what they need in the space to get by. So in the philosophy of good placemaking, for example, And that translates today to transit-activated corridors, boulevardization, and walkable communities, most importantly. Is this idea of what exists within the 5-kilometer radius of the place that the occupant is inhabiting. Do they have everything that they need to work, to live, to enjoy their life within that 5 kilometers? And to what degree do they have it? And to what degree do they have diversity there? And that diversity exists across segments, not just within, do they have a diverse options of energy providers or banks that they can go to, but do they have natural diversity that is built in and part of and accounted for in their community? Do they have a diversity of ecosystem services that are benefiting that place as well? Do they have a diversity of transit options, or is it automobile dependent? Do they have a diversity of pathways that they can take to get from A to B to C, or do they only have one walkable and one bikeable pathway? So those elements, when built into the design and embedded in the idea of making the space holistically and activating the space, as Kate Myrick pointed out, that's where the value is. It's not simply a game of economies of scales and how quickly can we respond to acute housing crises and build up and increase available housing stock and make it affordable. It's how well can we create useful spaces that are still going to be useful and valuable 7 generations from now? That's the real question.